Hello everybody and welcome to this video where we will be talking and analyzing how simple and solid moves can win you games seemingly without any effort. This topic was discussed in the today's newsletter on my Substack, so check that one if you haven't. And the game we will be analyzing is played by the hero of today's Substack, Timur Radjabov. The game was played in 2017 at the FIDE Grand Prix in Geneva, a tournament which Radjabov won. And in the game in question, he played Peter Svidler. So let's get on to the game. Knight f3. Radjabov was leading the tournament at that point, so this was played in round 7 out of a 9-round tournament. So he was, well, obviously hoping to continue playing solidly and to maintain the lead by just avoiding any risk or as much as possible. So by playing knight f3, this is a typical way for white to avoid the Grunfeld, which, as the whole world knows, is Peter Svidler's preferred defense against d4. So knight f3, knight f6 by Svidler, c4. Now the idea for white is if black just goes, for example, g6, to go knight c3 and then threaten e4, avoiding the Grunfeld move d5. So in this game, Svidler went for the move c5, transposing to the symmetrical English, and after knight c3 goes d5. The idea is to still maintain options to play the Grunfeld in some way or another, or at least obtain positions that are similar to the Grunfeld. So after cd5, knight d5, now Radjabov played the move e3. The point of black's setup is that the move e4, which would look natural. Black has the move knight b4, and this pinpoints immediately the weakness of the d3 square. There is a lot of theory here, but it's considered that black is doing all right. So with that in mind, Radjabov played the move e3. And now the point of this move order is that if black insists on fianchettoing the dark squared bishop with g6, white has the annoying checks on the a4 e8 diagonal, whether that be by the queen a4 check, or by the bishop b5 check. And both these moves really make it problematic for black to finish development as things are happening in the center. The knight is, for example, hanging queen a4, queen b3 is an idea. If knight c6, knight e5 can lead to the doubling of the pawns on the c file. So this is not far from ideal for black. Therefore, black takes on c3, and now the first important point in the game, d takes c3. Now, the point of black's play, if is, for example, b takes c3, which looks more natural, taking towards the center, intending d4 after g6, black would have obtained the Grunfeld setup. So this would have fit in nicely with Svidler's plans and repertoire. But Radjabov plays d takes c3, and now what do we have here? We have a symmetrical pawn structure, 3 against 3 on the queen side, 4 against 4 on the other side. But even though it's symmetrical, it has to be said that white's position remains the easier one to play. And we will see this theme throughout the game. Now black needs to choose. Does he exchange queens, queen d1, or he avoids it by playing a move like queen c7? In the game in Geneva that we are looking at, Svidler decided to exchange queens. But a funny fact is that 4 years later, playing on the internet, he chose to keep the queens on board and went queen c7 against Radjabov, still against Radjabov. But after e4, e6, this structure that we see now on the board, so a2, b2, c3, e4, f2, g2, h2 against a7, b7, c5, e6, f7, g7, h7, is easier to play for white because there is a big difference in the activity of the bishops. So you can see both white's bishops can be developed nicely, whether to e3, we will see also on f4, and the one from f1 can go to d3 to support maybe the e4 pawn, later maybe f4, or just e2 or c4. But the same cannot be said for black's bishops. The bishop on f8 is limited by the pawn on c5, and the bishop on c8 is limited by the pawn on e6. If it's fianchettoed with b6, bishop b7, it's still somewhat limited by that pawn on e4. So the activity and the some space advantage that white has on the king side make this position still easier for white. So black doesn't really have easy game, even if he decides to keep the queens on board. The funny fact about this game, when Svidler decided to avoid the exchange of queens, is that he could not avoid it for too long. After bishop d3, bishop d7, queen d2 was played by Radjabov, with the idea to exchange queens with queen f4. So bishop c6, Svidler decided to develop the bishop on the a8 h1 diagonal, but it's not too active because e4 is well defended. Queen f4 now. Bishop d6 is not possible because e5 is coming with tempo. And after queen f4, bishop f4, again he ended up in an unpleasant endgame, which he lost again, this time in this game even faster, in only 28 moves. You can look up this game from 2001. So this was just a short illustration that this position, even though symmetrical and black is the instant option of going to an endgame, is actually unpleasant for black. So let's go back to the game. Queen takes d1, king takes d1, and we saw from the previous game that white wants to go e4, so that then he can develop the dark squared bishop, whether to e3 or to f4. So Svidler went for bishop f5 in this position to stop e4 by controlling that square. But this is short-lived. Knight d2, a typical maneuver for white in these structures. The knight supports the e4 push, but is also transferred to the queen side. It can go to c4 or to b3 depending on circumstances, from where it will exert pressure on the queen side. And we will see that in these positions white generally plays on the queen side. So knight c6, black develops e4 and bishop e6 now. So Svidler decides to keep the bishop in a somewhat more active position on e6 and plans to develop the bishop on f8 on g7 after g6, bishop g7. But even if it comes to g7, we see that it's not very active, one. And second, we will see the bishop will actually never make it to g7 in this game. But what I would like you to pay attention to is to observe that how this position, seemingly pretty simple one, and really like it doesn't look like black has many problems or problems at all, imperceptibly turns into a first problematic one for black and then even a lost one in very short number of moves. And I will discuss the reasons for this, but from this moment on, please observe how the game develops and how the game shifts in white's favor and goes downhill for black. So king c2, normal move, removing the king from the open d file, improving the king's position. g6, Svidler follows his plan, and now bishop c4. This is important. In this structure, it's useful for white to exchange the light squared bishops, because the light squared bishop is the somewhat more active one for black, whereas white's light squared bishop is fine to be exchanged, because that will allow white's knight easier access to the light squares on c4 or b5, so there will be no light squared bishop for black to control those squares. So just to illustrate, after, let's say, bishop c4, knight c4, the knight is really well placed on c4. And now the plan is to continue similar to the game, a4, a5, then bishop e3, attack the pawn on c5, and simply just play on the queen side. For example, if now black decides to chase away the knight on c4 by playing b5, after knight e3, the knight now targets the d5 square, but also these two pawns, b5 and c5, have been too far advanced, and after bishop g7, a4 is a standard way to attack these overextended pawns, and after b4 the knight triumphantly goes back to the now ideal square on c4 from where it cannot be chased away. Then bishop e3 comes, the pawn on c5 will be attacked, and black's position is really problematic. So going back, Svidler decided to keep the bishops on the board, bishop d7, but he won't be able to keep them on the board for too long. Now Radjabov continues the development, knight b3 with tempo, attacking the pawn on c5, b6 defends the pawn, and now a4. It's very simple. If you look at it, just so straightforward, easy play for white on the queen side. The plan is to go a5, and then after a b6, there will be a pin on the a file. So white simply wants to continue attacking on the queen side. Svidler goes knight e5, attacking the bishop on c4, but Radjabov just continues the strategical aim of exchanging light squared bishops and goes bishop b5. Move 14. Already black needs to solve concrete problems, and I would say even it's just he can forget about counterplay. He just needs to passively defend and trying to fend off white's threats. Now Svidler decided to go a6 and force the exchange on d7. This loosens the queen side, but even avoiding it would not have helped much. Let's say long castle. Bishop f4, developing with tempo, attacking that knight. Bishop g7, defending the knight. And now bishop a6 is an annoying check because it forces the king on the h2ba diagonal, and now the king is pinned. Actually, the knight on e5 is pinned because the king is forced to stay on c7 or b8 for that matter. But now just knight d2, rerouting the knight. So the knight is coming to c4 to put more pressure on the knight. a5 is also an idea, and well, black is still under pressure. So Svidler decided to force the issue with a6, and after bishop takes d7, knight takes d7, bishop e3. White finished development and threatens the move a5 to basically wreck black's queen side. After a5 would attack the pawn on b6, which in turn defends the pawn on c5, which is attacked 2 times by the bishop and the knight. So you see 16 moves, and black is in serious trouble already. He still hasn't finished development. The bishop is still on f8, and counterplay is non-existent. White is playing normal moves, simple developing moves, at the same time increasing the pressure on the queen side. So it's now the question here is like, why did this happen? And I think the nature of this development lies in the nature, the characteristic of the opening variation chosen. Because that structure after dc3 in the opening, even though symmetrical, is in fact more favorable for white, and it gives him really straightforward and easy play. Whereas black lacks that type of play and lacks even a clear plan what he should be doing. Exchange queens, not exchange queens, either way, problems persist. So when the player, depending on which side, when let's say a player ends up in such a position when there is no clear plan and there are no clear ideas that he should follow, it's very easy to end up in a prospectless and even lost position very quickly without committing any inaccuracies. And vice versa. Let's talk about white side in this case. White ended up in a position which was very simple to play. Straightforward moves, developing moves, just play on the queen side, standard moves, and all of a sudden white ends up in a strategically winning position. Again, it's the character of the position, the character of the opening that determined this development in the game. And sometimes players just, you could see even elite players fail to grasp this inherent, you could say, characteristic of certain types of positions, like for example in this one after d takes c3 in the opening. So let's see how the game continued and how Radjabov continued to pile up the pressure, following exactly the same strategy of natural moves, straightforward moves, simple play. e6, you see that black can no longer afford to develop the bishop on g7 because the bishop is needed to defend the pawn on c5 after white pushes a5, obviously. So rook h d1, putting the rook on the a file, long castle, and knight d2. So now the knight is transferred to c4. Note that black can really never play a5 in this position, because that would fatally weaken b5 and c4, which can be used for a king, for a knight, yeah, and eventually a b4 would open the queen side and would expose black's weaknesses. So bishop e7, well, never made it to g7, yeah, knight c4, yeah, threatening that pawn, for example, maybe exchange sacrifice on d7, knight d6 is also a threat, possible threat, and a5 still remains the main strategical idea to finally weaken the c5 pawn by removing that pawn from b6. King b7, trying to improve the position of the king. Going to c7 is not better, because there is a bishop f4 check, king c6, and now bishop d6 is strong, attacking that bishop on e7, and after an exchange, let's say bishop d6, rook d6, king c7, rook a d1, yeah, black can hardly move. Like the knight cannot move because bishop b6 is hanging, yeah, the king cannot move because the knight is attacked twice, yeah, and the knight cannot move because of exchange of the rooks would lead to the to a loss of the b6 pawn. So black can barely move, and this is just pretty hopeless. So Svidler went to b7, but now a5, the standard, the expected move to finally saddle black with static and static weaknesses, which would be eternal, basically. So that pawn on c5 and the pawns on a6 will be isolated ones. Unfortunately for black, he cannot go b5, and this is one of the lines white had to calculate when playing a5, because after knight d6 check, bishop d6, rook d6, black is basically without moves. He needs to defend a6, for which the king cannot move from b7. He needs to defend c5, for which the knight cannot move from d7, but also there is the threat of rook a d1 attacking that knight on d7. And black cannot defend it because rook h e8, rook a d1, rook e7 leads to loss of material after bishop g5 and just game over. So b5 was not an option for black, which means that, okay, he played rook h f8, just to make a move, because no moves that improve black's position. And now after the capture on b6, we see black saddled with these weaknesses of isolated pawns on a6 and c5. 8 takes b6, knight takes b6, knight a5 check, king c7, bishop f4 check, bishop d6, and now another instructive moment. Should white exchange bishops or not? The answer is no, because white's bishop is much more useful than black's, as it can attack black's weaknesses. So first, white removes the bishop with tempo, bishop h6, attacking the rook, even taking advantage of that silly looking move, rook h f8, rook fe8, and now knight b3. Notice also how white is playing all the time with tempo. Every move is attacking something, every move is threatening something, and this type of play, of always threatening something, is very hard to play against. And all strong players play in this way, just that the way that they're doing it, threatening something, can be more tactical or can be more strategical. And this is where the stylistic preferences of each player lie. So knight b3 retreats the knight, but attacks the pawn on a6. So black defends it, rook a8, but now bishop e3, now the pawn on c5 is attacked. Black defends it, knight d7, rook a5, the pawn is attacked for a third time. Black defends it, king c6, now rook da1, and the pawn a6 is defended, is attacked, sorry. Black defends it, king b6, and now rook 5 a4. And this is another peculiar and very important moment, is that you see up to here, white was piling up the pressure by constantly attacking. Attack. With every move, there was a direct threat. The pawn on c5 was attacked, the pawn on a6 was attacked. All the time, direct threats. But now, with this move, rook 5 a4, white doesn't really attack anything. Yes, there are some threats. For example, liberating the a5 square for the knight a5, knight c4, for example, check. But there is no immediate threat. There is nothing is hanging right now. And it is usually in these moments, after a series of these continuous attacks, that the opponent cracks. So when the opponent is faced with a concrete attack, like pawn is attacked, this is hanging, that is hanging, they're focused and they fend off these, let's say, one move threats. But when in this case white made a pause and made a move rook 5 a4, okay, introducing threats but not as direct ones as the previous ones, the opponent feels like, maybe I got a break. And this is when they break down, actually. This is where they crack. And this is what happened to Svidler in this game, even though, it has to be admitted that the position is objectively losing and not enviable at all. But he cracks in a sense that now he loses by force. So notice this moment when realizing an advantage. Piling up of the pressure, improving the position with forcing moves, constantly attacking something, then making a pause, okay, one move, just stopping the rhythm, changing the rhythm a little bit, and that's the moment when the opponent usually cracks. Now the only move not to lose was actually to go king b7, knight a5, king c8, which looks ugly enough, and somehow it's still losing, but not exactly by forces in the game. But it's clear that to make these moves, it's just so unnatural and not really aesthetic, and we can understand Svidler for not wanting to play that. He actually played rook ec8, defending the pawn on c5 one more time, but now he loses by force. Knight a5, threatening knight c4. Yeah. Now he retreated the bishop, avoiding that check, but even retreating the king would not have helped, because king c7, knight c4, again renewing the attacks. The pawn on a6 is hanging, knight b8, rook d1, changing the line of attack. Now the bishop is hanging, bishop e7, bishop f4 check, yeah. King c6, and now a very nice move, rook a3. You see, again we have a similar development of the rhythm. Starting after king c7, knight c4, attack. Okay, 3 moves attacking, and now rook a3. Not attacking, but creating deadly threats like rook b3, rook b6 mate, or knight a5, also with mating threats, as king b6, rook b3 again would be mating, king a5, rook a1 would be mate. Yeah, or king b7, rook b7 would be a mate. Yeah, and black is losing. In the game, Svidler went bishop e7, but after rook b4 he actually resigned, because after the forcing line, king c7, rook b7 check, king d8, rook d1, he is losing material. Yeah, because rook c7, knight c6 is a double attack, and if rook c6, rook dd7, rook e7 wins a piece. So black base resigned because he loses a piece. So I think this was quite an impressive effort by Radjabov, and normally you wouldn't expect, actually you should expect by an elite player to be able to play all sorts of positions equally well. But Radjabov has always had this reputation of an attacking, tactical, dynamic player. That's how he rose to prominence. But as an elite player, he's obviously fully capable of playing all sorts of positions equally well. And in this game, we saw him play a positionally fantastic game, strangulating a dynamic player like Peter Svidler in 31 moves, where it's hard to pinpoint what exactly was Black's mistake. I spoke about this a little bit earlier when I said that the essence of Black's problems, where they came from, was the character of the position he got after the opening, simply being easier to play with white. So this was let's say the objective part of where the Black's problems came from. But there is also one aspect I would like to address, and that is the psychological aspect. And I'm pretty sure that you have all had games where you have won seemingly effortlessly. And probably also games where you have lost effortlessly, but let's not talk about those. So the question is, how did that happen? And I think if we take this game as an example, as an effortless win by white, I would say that these things happen when we play straightforward, solid, normal chess with confidence. When we don't have doubts in our moves, in our convictions, in our, let's say, mental state, then what I've noticed is that the doubts actually spill over to the opponent. So we play in a confident way, straightforward, normal, solid chess, and the doubts just go over across the board and they creep into the opponent's mind. And then they are not sure, should the bishop go to g7, should the bishop go to e7? They have all these doubts and insecurities about what should be done, how it should be done, whereas we play confidently. Of course, a4, a5, put the knight on b3, reroute it to c4, just play normal moves, yes? And then, as a result, you get this type of seemingly effortless games. And on this positive note, I will conclude this video. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, follow me on Substack, subscribe on Substack, follow me on Twitter, and I will thank you for watching it. So stay well, stay safe, and I'll see you soon in the next one. Cheers.